Right, guys, so this is part 2 of trying to fix my brake squeak. So in my last video, in part 1 of this video, I did the fronts, and it substantially helped fix the brake squeal. I did the pads and the rotors, which I think was the reason why a lot of it went away, but my rears always still squeaked. I do have almost 70,000 miles on this car, so it is getting to the point where I needed to replace the rears anyway. And I think, so I figured I would just do it, and I think it was going to fix my squeal, because it's actually the worst squeak now that I get, is when I'm backing out of a parking space or whatever, where the rear brakes are doing more of the work. I already started the driver's side, but I'll show you guys the passenger side, because that side has the one extra step of doing the wear sensor. So let me get the driver's side finished up here, and then I'll show you how to do the passenger side. Okay guys, so we finished this side already. A little bit of a teaching moment, so I had a little bit of a delay. So you may see a little bit of the inconsistencies in the video, but basically what happened was the rotors that I was going to put on and the pads were too small. So it goes to show you, one, check your parts before you start the project. Obviously I had the car up on a jack and stuff already, so I kind of had to let it sit for a while, wait for my parts to come in. So what I basically had to do is, because I have a 328 with the M Sport package, I was having trouble finding the stock or BMW replacement parts for a 328xi that were the right size. I have the 330 millimeter rotors, and the brake pads are bigger or are taller than the regular stock 328 ones are. So because I have the M Sport package, I actually had to look at a 335 stock rear rotor and pad. I think my bigger problem was with trying to find the brake pads. I couldn't find the right size ones. I could find the rotors with using 328, but so I used rockauto.com, and again, the easiest way that I found was if you just search for a 335. Again, if you have the M Sport package, I have the Brembo fronts that are not painted blue. They're just the plain bare, or the gray aluminum, or whatever they're called. And so my backs are just stock calipers, but they are the bigger size for the M Sport package. So again, I had to look at a 335, not a 328, and I was able to find the right parts really quickly. So just a little bit of a key point. Again, I finished this side. Like I said, I was going to do this side, and then I'll show you the other side. The other side has the sensor, so you'll be able to get the full view, or the full video of everything. I reused all my hardware, because honestly, my hardware is in really good shape. The brake pad kit that I ended up buying actually had the hardware with it. I suggest you look at it, inspect it, and if you think you need to replace it, replace it. Like I said, the brake pad kit that I bought, which I will link in the description from Rock Auto, will have the hardware if you need it. So I'll keep it, because my brother's got a 328, and that's what I'm going to do with the pads and rotors that didn't fit. He's got a 328 without the M Sport package, so I'm just going to use some of his car when he needs them. Save him a couple bucks. So yeah, so let me get started. I'll get started on the other side. So I already got the wheel off, jacked the car up, got the wheel off. Because I already did the other side, I already know I'm going to have problems getting this rotor off, so I'm going to have to kind of hammer it pretty hard. And I know that because the other side was really bad, and these haven't been changed in the same amount of time. So basically what I started with was I just kind of PB blasted around the center here. You don't want to get it sprayed all over the place, but you do want to kind of let that sit. So I'm going to, obviously I sprayed it, I'm going to let it sit for a little bit, and then we're going to work on getting the caliper off. And when I get the caliper off, I'm going to take it off kind of in stages. I'm going to take the actual caliper part off, and then the bracket, and and then I'll get the rotor off. And I like doing it that way. A lot of people like to just automatically take the whole bracket and caliper off. But I like to kind of clean up my parts and things like that, and I feel like it's easier to clean the caliper, and it's especially easier to clean the bracket when you do it in steps that way. And that way they're two pieces, and then that way too, if you do have a problem where the caliper does fall off or isn't hanging right, it's not as much weight hanging on the brake line in the back, the rubber brake line. So once I get the caliper off, then I'll show you how and you can probably see here, this is the sensor that comes through, and it kind of goes up and around and then the back and along around here, and then it goes up here. So you'll actually have to take this inner fender off to get the old brake sensor off and then put the new one back on. My brake pad sensor was not going off, so I didn't have to necessarily replace it, but I just know with some past experience, getting the old ones off the old brake pads can sometimes damage them. So I always think it's a good idea to plan ahead and get a new brake pad sensor. So let's get to it. All right, so the first thing we need to do is get this clip off. It's a pretty easy clip to get off. As long as you apply a little bit of pressure with a screwdriver, you should be able to kind of pry it out of here. And you really just got to get one side, and then getting the other side out is pretty simple. So that's pretty easy. These parts, like I said on the other side, a lot of these clips and hardware and stuff comes with a lot of the brake pad kits. But I'm actually going to reuse this one because I like that it says BMW and it's a BMW part. And the hardware was in really nice shape on the other side. So I'm hoping that this side is the same story. So I'm just going to keep the same hardware, just kind of clean it up a little bit. So I'll clean this up and make it look brand new. But that's the first step. Now we got to get the wear sensor, and there is they do wrap it on there's a bleed screw or bleed nipple right here on the back, and this is just kind of clipped on like that, and if you just undo that, this will come off. That's just a good first step to do, and it'll give you a little bit more room working back here. Now, to get the actual caliper off, there's these two, one on the top and the bottom. There's a plastic plug for the bolts, which are an 8mm Allen key, which you can use with a socket, or you can just use a regular Allen key. And so I'm going to pop those off just with the screwdriver here, which you should be pretty simple because the other part is rubber. Yep, and they pop right off just like that. There's one on the bottom, or the top and the bottom, and then you're able to get your 8mm Allen key back in there. So I'm going to use a socket and get that off. So now that I got these pins loosened up and we should be able to get the caliper off, it's time to kind of take the old brake wear sensor out so that it doesn't get bound up when I'm trying to take this off. So again, there's a couple clips along the frame here, and you can just kind of pop it out of these. Just remember kind of how it was routed, because you will have to do the same. That one's a clip, you can pop it up, and then it goes around, and there is a clip on this back side here, behind here, but that's not a problem. It's just a little bit of a reach, and just make sure you're grabbing at the right sensor here, because there is two sensors. One is an ABS sensor, and the other is your brake pad wear sensor. So you want to make sure that you leave the other sensor locked in there and that you're grabbing or unplugging the right one. And the same thing with this clip. So like I said, there are two clips there, or two wires there. You want to make sure you're grabbing the right sensor. So now I need to get into this. So now I need to get into here. I undid all these clips. I need to get into here, and that is just a 10 millimeter. And then there you can see the box. And this box, you just unplug it here, and then the connection is actually right here. So they do make it pretty easy for you. You can just unclip it and then take this out of here. There we go. There's a lot of dirt in there that I think was kind of binding up my clip where I couldn't push it down enough to get it up over the little safety pin. So if you need that, just kind of, again, use a screwdriver, get a little extra leverage in there. But basically that's off, so I'm going to wire it around so we can get that caliper off. All right, to get the caliper off, I already loosened, I showed you that, how to do the 8 millimeter hex screws. And so I loosened those, and then you might have to push the pins out a little bit with the screwdriver. You'll see what I mean when you get to this point, because you won't be able to just pull the caliper off. But then once you get it off enough, you might have to jiggle it. Oh, then it comes kind of right out. Now, I like to keep this pad in there, and I'll show you why in a second. But you don't want to let this hang, so you want to take this other pad off quickly and set it to the side. And then I like to do it right now where you can actually get the piston to depress. Now I've already gone into the engine bay. We already loosened the cap on the master cylinder. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take a C clamp and actually push the rest of this caliper back in, or the piston back in, just so I have a lot more room to work with when I go back in to put the new pad in. So it doesn't take a lot, but you can kind of see how I have this this lined up, or the C-clamp lined up on here, and then I'm just pressing on the old pad. You don't want to press right on the piston. And you just go until you can't press anymore, and then you know it's pretty much flush, and then you just loosen up the C-clamp to take it off. And then to get that pad out of there, you basically just kind of pull on it, and the clips on the inside of the piston will let go. And then the last piece is you got to get the brake pad wear sensor off. And to do that, you can kind of just yank on it, and it'll come right off just like that. Because I'm not using that, I don't really care how it comes off, and I'm not reusing this brake pad. And then you can actually you can pull the wear sensor all the way through, because we're going to get rid of the new one. And then of course you don't want this caliper just hanging by the rubber brake line. So what I like to do is there's a control arm here, and it hooks really nicely right on there. Now you want to be careful, you don't want to pinch anything in there, and you really should probably get a hook or a hanger, but I found that this works just fine for what I'm doing. Alright, so the next step is to get the caliper bracket off, and to do that you need a 16 millimeter, and there's a bolt right here, and then there's another bolt right down there. Now these are on pretty tight, so you may need to move this caliper. I mean, you can move it kind of to the inside here, as long as it's not hanging all of its weight from the brake line, you should be okay, and as long as you're not pinching anything on that brake line. So I'm going to start here. I'm going to do the bottom one first. The bottom one, it may work if you have the car jacked up. or on jack stands, it may work to get on your back and go like up underneath the front of the car, up over this way, and then lay up this way and get the wrench on it. I think that might be an easier way, and you might be able to get a little extra leverage. This one is kind of a crapshoot. Either one you want to do, I think will work out. So I'm gonna get these off, and then we'll keep moving. All right, now that we got the bracket off, we can set that off to the side because we'll clean that in a minute. But now we got to get the rotor off, and to do that, we need a 6mm hex key, and it shouldn't be on there too tight, so you should be able to just kind of get it on there. Yep, there we go. And that'll come out just like that. It's a small little thing. Don't want to lose that. And then hopefully, if you're not in the situation I'm in, you can just kind of yank it off. Again, I know from the other side that I'm going to need to kind of pound this off pretty hard because the other side was stuck on really bad. So I'm going to basically take my rubber mallet and try to shock it off. Now, I'm not reusing this rotor, so I don't have to be as careful as some of you might need to be if you're doing a wheel bearing or something like that, but you don't want to resort to using a regular hammer right away. I'm just doing it because, again, I know I'm not going to reuse this rotor. Now, you don't want to hit too hard, especially if you're using a metal hammer. Again, I'm just trying to knock you loose, and it's really tight on there. So just be careful. I would suggest hitting around here and on the sides of here, and even on the sides of here is a little dangerous. But because I think what really happens with these rear brakes is the parking brake is kind of a drum parking brake, and so I think when that happens, it gets really locked up on the inside there. So one, make sure your parking brake is off. I know mine's off already. It's just a really tight fit, so hopefully I can kind of work on getting this off, and it won't take too much longer. But yeah, so basically it'll take you a little while, so just be patient and be careful with what you're doing. All right, we got the rotor off, thankfully. It took a little bit of banging, but got it off. Here's what it looks like. So again, I'm doing this because I've had a little squeak going on, and I'm thinking that my squeak has to do with two things. One, either the pads rubbing up against the rotor because the rotor's a little worn out and the pads are a little worn out, or I might have had some squeal because of something moving around. But I think it has to do with this on this back side. You can see it's really ridged here on this rotor, and then it's a really uneven wear pattern on here, and the same thing, or it looks the same on the pad too. It doesn't look right. So I'm thinking that's where the squeak is coming from. But another culprit, and I noticed this when I was taking this bracket off, is you can see on there it looks like there's been a little bit of kind of rubbing going on there. So I'm thinking maybe that could be part of it as well. So I'm going to clean this up real good, get those new rotors on, and then I'm hoping that the squeal goes away. All right, we got everything clean. I took a wire wheel to here, and then I took a wire brush and basically went to town on the caliper, and then all the brackets and the bolts. So I basically just kind of cleaned this up as best I can, and then I also cleaned up, obviously, all the hardware and things like that. So that looks a lot better. I might clean it up a little bit more with some parts cleaner, but overall, I'm pretty happy with them. Like I said, I'm just going to reuse all my old hardware. I don't think there's no need for me to go through the whole process of putting new stuff on there. So first, I'm going to show you. I'm going to route the sensor first, and then I'm going to put the rotor on, and then we'll put the caliper back on. So we just put the new rotor, just set it on there. Now you got to get this screw in that, again, is the 6mm. And it's the same process of, or reverse process, obviously, of getting it in. Just kind of get it started and go down. And this doesn't have to be super tight. You really just got to get it hand tight, and it'll just kind of keep the rotor on there for you. And that's good right there. Again, just kind of hand tighten it. Now we're going to put the sensor on and kind of at least get it close to set up. That way, when we do put our pads and stuff on, we're not trying to get it all in there, get around everything. So first, I'm going to plug it back into where it's supposed to plug, like so, and then it'll go right back into here, into this little box here. It has its own place, just like that. And you can clip that box back on, and then we can put that back on. But I'm going to route that first just to make sure that we don't have to take anything off. This one unclips. Snaps in there. Again, there's another one behind the spring that you got to get in. That I'm not going to be able to get a good camera angle of as I'm trying to put it in. And then remember, there is one back here behind the spring. So you got to make sure that you do those. And again, make sure that you clip those down. And then it comes around the spring. Up, and then goes in right here. Again, this one just kind of clamps down. If I can get it in there. Like so. And then the same thing for this one, except this one doesn't have a clip, it just kind of guides in there. And then now that is ready to go. Now that's ready to go, so I'm just going to leave that up there out of the way. And now I can start working on getting the caliper bracket back on. The caliper bracket bolts on there and started. I'm going to kind of tighten, I want to tighten those down before I get the caliper on there, because I'll have a little bit more room to kind of work around with. The factory setting for this is, I believe, 50 pounds for these two bolts. I don't have a torque wrench that fits in here, so I just basically get it as tight as I possibly can, and that seems to work fine. I don't necessarily recommend that you do that. You should follow the factory specs. You should follow the factory specs on the 50 foot-pounds. But again, I'm just going to get it as tight as I possibly can, and that seems to do just fine for me. All right, so now we're ready to put the brake pads on. I like putting the brake pads on kind of as I'm doing putting the caliper on. I think everything just kind of ends up going a little bit more smoothly. So first step is you got to lubricate them, and you can lubricate a couple different places. I like to kind of do just a little bit on the back of each brake pad, and then I just kind of use the brush and get a nice thin layer all the way across. If I get too much, don't worry about it. You can always wipe some off, but I like to just get it all over, all the contact points up underneath here for sure, on each pad. And again, you don't want to get it on the pad material, you just want to get it on this back plate here, and on the top there, on the top there, just like so. And you can clean it up. Again, if you get too much, you don't want a lot. You kind of, again, just want like a thin coat, thin layer on it. And again, just make sure you get it on the contact points. You could just get by with just doing a little bit, but like I said, I like to do it kind of all over the backing plate here, because it could squeak, or there could be some metal on metal with the piston and things like that. So I like to just do this whole plate piece here, but not too much, just a little bit, and then just spread it around. And then if you get too much, just wipe it off. Not a huge deal at all. And it's important to have nice clean hands for this. for obvious reasons. You don't want dirt and stuff getting into this, because it'll sit like that for a while. So now this one actually gets clipped into the piston here. So it goes, this clip just kind of goes in here, and you should, once you kind of get it started, just be able to pop it in there, and then that won't come off. So you can then set that out of the way, and then be careful getting the next one in here, and you can literally just set it up on there. But first, before I'm going to do that, I'm actually going to get a little bit of grease, of caliper grease, in the contact points on here. Just, again, a little bit. You don't need a lot on the but just where it's going to touch the pads. And that's all you really need. Again, you don't want to get a lot on the rotor. And then you can just kind of fit this pad on there, and it should hang pretty nicely, just like that. And then that should give you enough space to work with. And that should give you enough space to work with. And then that should give you enough space to work with to get the caliper back on. Now, getting the caliper back on is pretty simple. You can just kind of slide it on there, and it should stay there pretty nicely if you did a good job putting the or depressing the piston. Now, I like to do this part first, where you basically take, you put the nipple. So putting the caliper on, you just kind of fit it on, kind of just like this, and it should stay on there pretty well. But if you did a good job depressing the piston, it may not have a lot of stuff on it. So now I'm going to take the brake pad wear sensor, and you want to be careful because you don't want this coming in contact with the rotor or anything. So you want to kind of get it as far away as possible and get the right angle on it. And then this bleed nipple up here is it goes right in between here and here, and you just put the cap back on the bleeder nipple up there, around there, and then that's on there. And then now we'll be able to put this on the caliper once we get the caliper tightened up here. So I'm going to use the 8mm and tighten up the pins on the back here, just to get it nice and snug. And then we'll put the sensor on, and then we'll finish tightening all that up. So getting the wear sensor on there is pretty, it's pretty tight in there. Just make sure, a couple of things. One, make sure that this bump right here is facing towards the pad material. So it's facing towards the rotor. And then there is a little clip, or a little area just for it right in there. I don't know if you guys can see that, but right in there. And then you may need to use, I think I'm going to have to use a screwdriver to get it on there, because it's a pretty tight fit. So I'm going to use a screwdriver, and then I'll come back. Alright, so everything is back together. Looks pretty good. Again, I'll show you how to put the clip on. Alright, I showed you how to put the clip on. The caliper itself, that has the piston part, that it has 22 foot-pounds for each of the 8mm hex keys, and then the bracket is 50 foot-pounds. Again, both of those I got to about the same. Well, I shouldn't say about the same. Both of those I torqued down as much as I could because I couldn't fit a torque wrench in there. I've never had a problem with that in the past, so it should be okay. This little thing is not a huge deal. It doesn't take a lot of torque. You just kind of hand tighten it. This is, make sure you put that 10mm back up there for the window line, or the wheel liner, and that really doesn't have to be torqued at all. You just kind of get it snug. Just make sure that the sensor wire is not in contact with anything that's going to hit or bind or move. Make sure it's over the control arm.
Make sure you put these plastic caps back on over there. That'll keep dust out of there because those pins are really important. And then when all you got to do is put the wheel back on here. But one final step, which again I have already I got a head start on, but you cannot forget to put the master cylinder cap back on. I had this off so that we could depress the piston, push some fluid back in to help me. But you want to make sure that that's back on and that it's nice and tight. And then you can put this cover back on. Putting the cover back on is really, really simple. It kind of just fits right back in there, just like that. There's a little clip here that goes in a hole, just like that. And then you just use a 10 millimeter to kind of lock those bolts down, which I'll do in a second here. I don't have a 10 millimeter on me right now. But once you get all that done, then you can close the hood. And then when you get in the car, which I'll do on the ground, you got to depress the pedal. So after you've done the brakes, you want to get in and you want to depress the pedal a couple times. Now I already did it and thought the camera was rolling, but it wasn't. But it will go all the way to the floor, and then once you start pressing it a couple times, it'll feel a lot firmer. And that's just the fluid getting back into the pistons that you pushed out when you pushed the caliper pistons back.